TPCSI fans, you want to revolutionize your sports investing habits? Allow me to tell you about WagerWire. WagerWire is an app that helps you become a superior bettor by allowing you to sync all your sports books and track all your bets in one place. See your current action, your betting history, and stats. You could also sign up for sports books and collect bonus offers. Follow them at WagerWire on X, as it's the best account on the platform. Head to App Store or Play Store now and search WagerWire and download the app.
Jared, hey, we're gonna need you to tone it down with the Summer Friday thing, okay?
What are you talking about?
Well, for one, it's not summer anymore.
Oh, really?
Coconut. Also, who is this?
I'm the caddy.
Oh, he's my intern.
Sorry, intern. I'm his intern.
Yeah, he's doing a great job.
No golfing in the office, okay? Summer Fridays are over. You can keep the Hawaiian shirt, but the rest of this stuff, all right? Are you grilling?
Oh, yeah. Did you want a burger or a hot dog?
No, grilling in the office.
That's a good point. We should take this outside.
No, that don't. You put that right back down.
Yo, it's all in the hips.
Oh, dude, come on, we gotta go. Let's go.
Yourself a merry little Christmas night, and have yourself a merry little Christmas.
Good afternoon, sports fans from all around the globe. I am the host, Jeff Dawson, East Coast Sports Investors, and it's that time of the week for the closing bell with good friend and colleague, Mr. Ron Momorlewski, live from LA to talk some college football, that popsicle headache, which hopefully this weekend will get it kind of, sort of figured out. There'll be someone screaming and hollering, at least one team. We know that. So we'll get into that. We'll talk some NFL. Big divisional game tonight with the Packers traveling to Detroit. That shiny toy, that sexy Detroit Lion NFC champs Super Bowl favorite, has lost a little of its tarnish the last couple of weeks, decimated by injuries in the back end of their defense. It'll be interesting to see how Ron sees that, what his power rankings look like as we get into the NFL. But first and foremost, a shout out to our proud sponsors and partnerships. It's WagerWire. Head on over to Google Play. Download that app. It is free. I promise we'll take good care of you there. Viva Tequila Seltzer, as you saw in the commercial. New flavor, coconut. The East Coast is cuckoo for coconut, of course. Now lemon, 6 flavors. Go try one. CT Bets Austin. Great people, great team, great family. Go enjoy a Viva Tequila Seltzer. And last but never least, Terry Smith, Atlanta Steaks and Seafood. Jump on over to Facebook. Introduce yourself to Terry Smith, then head on over to atlantasteaksandseafood.com. Steaks, chops, seafood, lobster tails, appetizers. He's got you covered for every holiday event, and of course through the football and Super Bowl. Use the promo code STEAKS10, get 10% off your full order. So without further ado, let's bring him in, Mr. Ron Momorlewski.
Good afternoon, Jeff. A wonderful sunny in Southern California Thursday in December, which is fantastic for us West Coast people. Great weekend ahead. Sorry if I'm running about 32 seconds behind, but Matt Uberflus and I and the Bears, we had a conversation and we decided to delay things just a little on this end.
Shout out to Daniel Berry, Sports Highlights. Always glad to see you. I assume Russell Sale is here and a bunch of the other supporters here. So much to talk about, and I love this time, this spot here. I could talk for hours, but I know we got dinner. You might have tennis or something, so we'll try to wrap this up in a reasonable hour here. College football conference championship games. Tuesday is now a couple days behind us. The selection committee, the brackets. We hope everything plays itself out. Thoughts on their thoughts and thoughts of the games on Saturday?
A lot of people are right when they say most of the Tuesday shows do not matter because only the next to last and the last one matters. I'm wondering if even this last Tuesday one matters because we remember a whole bunch of years ago when TCU and Boise were fighting it out as group of 5 teams. And then all of a sudden, Ohio State passed them. And then last year, such an amazing amount of lobbying for Alabama and Nick Saban, especially because I think Nick Saban knew he was done and he wanted to do everything in his power to sell out right then and say, I need to be in that Final Four. And he got in the Final Four. So I don't have any real thoughts about it. I know there's that dynamic about Alabama, Mississippi, South Carolina, how close they were together. It's a tough call. I feel bad for Mississippi, but they had it in their own hands and they just couldn't get it done a couple of weeks before. I don't feel all that bad for Alabama because they got stomped on by Oklahoma a little bit before that. And unfortunately for South Carolina, they lost to both teams. So that's tough. Miami opened the door for them. And because of the strength of the schedule and because Miami dodged a bunch of bullets, they're perceived as below that. And now we wait to see what happens with SMU in the title game. But personally, I think it should be 3 SEC teams in and you cap it at that. But there's not 12 worthy teams this year, perhaps. Maybe there's only 10 or 11 in the expanded 12-team playoffs. So we don't know how it's going to play out.
As the week progressed, FanDuel looked like the culprit where Alabama went from even money to as high as minus 400 to make the playoff before Tuesday's show. Someone must have got the script at FanDuel, so they made sure they covered that. But on Monday, you could have had Alabama plus 2,000 to win it all versus trying to get the minus now 400 in the playoff, down to about minus 1,600 last time I checked. I've seen the brackets initially set up where they'd be 3.5-point underdogs at Notre Dame, as Notre Dame would host Alabama potentially. Did you see any value in Alabama plus 2,000 or now at even 1,600? I mean, they're already going to be 3.5-point underdogs if it stays the same way at Notre Dame.
Well, 2 schools of thought here. Number one, obviously, if you're not one of the top 4 seeds, you're going to have to play an extra game. And we talked about this just prior to coming on live. I mean, we're talking about teams that are going to play as many as 16 or even 17 games if they were conference champion and, for example, Big 12 or ACC, and they didn't have one of those 4 seeds. And we're talking a lot of games for these college athletes who have never played this many games before at this level. So that's the hard part. Of course, if you're seed 5 through 8, you host that first game, and then you got 3 others. But that's one school of thought. The other school of thought is there really a dominant team this year? Maybe it's Oregon. I'm not really sure about that. As far as the SEC is concerned, Texas has proven vulnerable. Georgia's proven vulnerable. The other leagues are further behind in their power ratings. I don't think the value is on any favorite. So anybody who's, let's say, 10-1 or more, I wouldn't question a ticket on anybody that's 10-1 or more in this particular field. This particular year, I just don't see a dominant team.
Now, this was a shocker. I'm going to use the word shocker in regards to this was the year Ohio State finally was going to stop the bleeding and beat Michigan, 19.5-point favorites, and get into the Big Ten championship game and hopefully get their revenge on their only loss to Oregon. What the hell happened?
Yeah, it was a shocker because on top of everything else, Ohio State had really been bad-mouthing Michigan. They knew all season long that they were just going to dominate this game. They hired Chip Kelly to dominate this game. They had Jim Knowles as a defensive coordinator. And then prior to the game, Michigan loses its arguably best offensive weapon in their tight end. And they lose a presumed first or second round pick at cornerback. Neither one plays in the game. And then what we saw happened. And I can't really explain it other than to say that in my opinion, the game plan for Ohio State was a little bit skewed. At times, it seemed like they wanted to exercise run dominance against the Michigan front four that, quite frankly, that's their strength. They defend the run really, really well. The bottom line is they probably didn't trust their quarterback all that much. Obviously, he made some horrible throws near his own goal line that opened up the door for Michigan to play from ahead, and Ohio State feeling the time pressure, then they had to change their offense a little bit. But the bottom line is they should have been able to attack Michigan in the secondary early and often. And when that didn't happen, I think Michigan got more confidence as the game went along.
You know, as you said, there's no dominant team, but everyone that comes onto this show, everyone I talk to in our lanes, Ron, they say pound for pound, both sides of the ball, Ohio State is the best team. And as you said, there's no dominant team. I think Oregon's been playing with their food the last month because they've had nothing to play for. Now, maybe they flip the switch, they dominate Penn State, get the week off, they host, yada, yada, yada. But there's no one. Texas has the best defense, I think, right now in the country. They got a decent quarterback. They have a good offense. They were there last year. So if you had to just pull before next Sunday, this Sunday, you had to pull one team out of the hat, one team that you think that would be last man standing. Do you have one? Or who would it be, I should say, Ron?
Yeah, I don't think I have one, but you mentioned Texas, and other than that Georgia game, they've allowed 10 points per game, which is hard, really hard to do in today's football, to allow just 10 points a game, especially in the SEC. And Texas has a little bit more of an out-of-conference schedule that's tougher than some of the traditional SECs. Maybe they'll learn from it where they can schedule these directional schools and whatever. But Texas is a pretty decent schedule. And they have a lot of weapons, and they found a running back the last 7 weeks as well. But I'd probably put Oregon as the lukewarm one to stand. And I'm going to go back to when Dan Lanning was hired at the University of Oregon. This was a departure. This was a man with SEC ties going into the Pac-12, where the Pac-12 was different in terms of style of play and everything. And Dan Lanning had his good and some bad days in the Pac-12, which is a different style of conference, where only two teams, Utah all the time and Ohio State and Oregon State more recently, only Utah and Oregon State played defense. And Dan Lanning wanted to teach defense to Oregon, and he was getting there. But he brought an SEC-style team to the Pac-12. And I would argue that of all the teams that went to realignment this past year, Oregon was the best suited to go to one of the Power 2 teams, Power 2 conferences, either the SEC or the Big Ten, because of Dan Lanning and because of the kind of style that he plays, the recruits that he wanted. They were more of an SEC mentality. And now that transition, SEC Big Ten, to play in that conference, better suits Oregon than it did a Washington, certainly better suited it than USC and UCLA. So I would argue they have some of the pieces in place to play toe for toe with these other conferences.
Looking at all the games here, I have to ask you this question. And you talked about the SEC, the bias. You talked about the campaigning for Alabama last year. In any world, if Clemson was to beat SMU, would they pull that card and drop SMU out of the Final 12?
Well, I guess SMU should be worried, and hopefully, these are college kids, and they've got to filter all that out. They should be off social media. They shouldn't be reading any newspapers or whatever, because if Clemson somehow found a rhythm on offense and won that game 27-6 or something like that, SMU would probably be in danger, despite the fact that they've won by margin. I mean, they're not eking games out like Miami was doing. They were winning by margin, SMU, with the schedule that was laid out in front of them. They had some early struggles, but my new theory is that everybody's going to have some early struggles in college because of the portal and nil and everything. You're reinventing your team. It's like a free agency, And you're not just adding 8 players like in the NFL, you're adding 28 players sometimes in these NCAA programs, and you're adding them at a younger age, 18, 19, 20. So SMU found its rhythm and they rolled with it, and they belong in the 12-team playoff. So I'm hoping win or lose, and hopefully it's close enough that the committee still understands SMU's full body of work and keeps them in.
I get all the bowl games in front of me. What I like to do here, is there any game in particular that your eyes are looking at, the numbers don't add up, or any edges or values that you actually see, whether it's tomorrow or on Saturday?
Yeah, sorry to say, I don't see a lot of value, but I see a lot of intrigue more than value. This is a UNLV Boise rematch. The last game was at UNLV, and it was flip a coin game. And this one's in Boise, so it's the blue turf. The line surprised me just a little bit because I thought we'd get some Boise public action and stuff like that. But UNLV can play with them toe for toe. They held Aston Genty to something like 33, 129 in that area, 3.9 per carry. Obviously, Genty is a machine when he runs the ball. They're willing to hand it to him 30 plus times. UNLV can play with them. I think UNLV is actually the better overall running team. The one issue I have with UNLV is red zone performance, because they've settled for 21 field goals this year. A lot of them coming in the red zone, some of them a little bit longer. UNLV has to finish drives. I'm secretly kind of rooting because I'm an underdog type rooter. I'd like to see a team like a Boise State and anybody else in the group of 5 actually get one of those 4 automatic buys. I think it would be good for football overall. But obviously, if Boise loses, then the group of 5 is going to fall back to that 12 seed. We know that it's probably going to be UNLV, and it's going to fall back to that 12 seed. But if Boise wins, unless the committee pulls a fast one again and moves the Iowa State, Arizona State winner from 15th or 16th in their poll past Boise State, then you have Boise State in the Final Four. So I'm secretly rooting for that, but I have a feeling this is going to be a nail-biter game. So that's one. And then the second one, I think I would pick, according to my power numbers, Marshall should not be as big as what were we talking, 5.5 point underdog right now against UL Lafayette. It's funny because I think UL Lafayette is the better team. But when I looked at my power numbers, I said, well, wait a second. I have this line much closer to 4 than even 3.5, as opposed to 5.5 and trending towards 6. I think if they both played their best game, UL Lafayette would win by margin. But I think if you're talking about what's been going on recently, I think Marshall is a little bit live. The only concern I have is that this is the time of the day, the time of the year where coaches get calls. And Marshall's coaches getting calls, UNLV's coaches getting calls. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on because we got the transfer portal opening in a few days, and people want to fill their coaching vacancies. Jeff, we have 20 coaches that are going to be new. And we barely finished the season. I mean, job stability is crazy. So if you can block out the outside noise on some of this stuff, I think that line looks a little bit. I'm just surprised that Marshall's getting that many points.
Last question in college football. Sunday morning, 12:15. It's 9:15 out in the West. You just got done having some breakfast. You got your coffee there. And we got Biff's Almanac in front of me. There's going to be one shocker. What's the shocker?
Wow. I've been lacking Biff's Almanac the last couple of weeks because the major shocker for me is that there's no shocker. I mean, I didn't predict Ohio State losing to Michigan. Shocker. I'm looking at the board because none of these lines are very large. It's only a 2.5 point spread, 2 point spread, but I've heard Paul Stone say it. I've heard other people say it. Almost everybody I respect in this business. I can't find anybody who likes Clemson. And that would scare me. because Clemson's playing with house money right now. They're lucky to be in this spot. They, in some respects, they could have beat South Carolina last week, but it wouldn't have mattered. It wasn't even a conference game and stuff like that. So now they lose that game, and yet they have a chance to be in the 12-team playoff. They're playing with house money. They're not defending the run well whatsoever, but their quarterback's pretty good. Their running back is hard to bring down. I guess to a lot of the knowledgeable people, the sharp people that I follow with, they think it's going to be a shocker if SMU loses. And I'm not so sure that, I mean, these things, there are no locks of the century, locks of the year, locks of the week. So let's just say it wouldn't surprise me, and maybe it would be shocking that Clemson wins by 7.
And I like that thought process. We talked backstage. I talked to Paul about this, and it brings back flashbacks of a couple years ago, SEC championship game, Alabama, Georgia undefeated. It didn't matter other than the SEC championship game. They were in the Final Four, win, lose, or draw. It was Alabama who already had a loss that had to win to get into that Final Four. Georgia plays a good first half. They don't open up the playbook because they probably thought deep down that they're going to see this team again. Sure enough, Alabama wins the SEC championship. Georgia gets to the Final Four. Georgia wins the national championship. So as Dabo says, hey, we'll be the first team to go undefeated and win a national championship. We'll be the first team with 3 losses and shock the world and win the national championship.
Is that true? Is that the first with 3? There was a year I don't know. I don't remember. There was one back there with Colorado played for the championship, but they didn't win it, I guess. So, yeah, there are some that have played for the championship, but maybe not won it.
So, yabba dabba do, we shall see. But you're right. Everyone I've talked to likes SMU in that spot there. We'll transition to the NFL. Great game tonight. I said earlier that in the intro, the Lions juggernaut of putting up 50 burgers the last few weeks has kind of hit a few bumps. They got more injuries than the MASH unit in MASH. In comes a Packer team. Yesterday, Ron, that line dipped to 2.5. I woke up this morning, 3.5. They're getting that Lion money again. Over a 51. I mean, the way I read the market, 27-23, 27-24 Lions. Wouldn't be shocked. 24-24. First one to 27 wins this game. Thoughts on tonight's divisional battle?
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot has been made of Detroit's injuries, and Green Bay has some as well. That's just the nature of the beast. I talked about this with Chris and Ted about an hour ago. At some point, Detroit's power number had to have a ceiling, and they were going to come back to earth. And one of the beauties of what Detroit is going through is that Minnesota is right on their heels, and Philadelphia for the number 1 seed right on their heels. So it makes it an intriguing game from so many different directions. If Green Bay wins, this is suddenly a wide open race for the number 1 seed and a relatively wide open race with divisional games still to come in that really competitive NFC North division. If Green Bay loses, I think Green Bay relegates itself to the 6th or 7th seed, and then Detroit can reset with a 10-day absence of games where they get that extra rest, and then they can work to preserve that number 1 seed. So you're right. There's a lot on the line for this game.
Lou Finocchiaro was on with the UFC show at 3:00 today, and he says the books here are crazy here because you can get Minnesota at 4-1 to win the division. You can get the Packers at plus 350. Minnesota still has to play both of them as well here. And that Minnesota team is like that scab that won't go away. They just keep winning and winning and winning. In comes Kirk Cousins in the revenge game and the Falcons this week. And Minnesota's still 5.5 point favorites.
Yeah, Minnesota is interesting. I think they're well coached. I think they're doing things to try to limit Sam Darnold turnovers. He doesn't have to win the game for them. He's got a running back right next to him, Aaron Jones, that does wonderful things. He's got a strong tight end. He's got Justin Jefferson. He's got Flores year 2 of that system. They put a lot of pressure on opposing quarterbacks. They have 39 defensive sacks. That's a tremendous total. So if Darnold plays an acceptable game, they're going to win a lot of the games, and they just happen to be close games. Maybe because Darnold's been letting them in, or they're being a little cautious. And the Jacksonville game was the biggest example, 12-7, when Minnesota was in the red zone so many times, but didn't come away with touchdowns. Atlanta, they're still leading the division. It's not a very good division, obviously. Minnesota, Green Bay, Detroit, so much better power rated than Atlanta. But stranger things have happened. Now we have to wonder what's going on with Kirk Cousins. His arm strength didn't look that good last Sunday.
And I've said this for the last few weeks. Maybe you agree, maybe you don't. There's rumblings that the fan base would like to see Michael Penix Jr. I know Kirk Cousins was very upset when he was drafted. They're like, hey, guys, you just signed me to this contract here. I've gone on record. I'll say it to you again here. I think next year, game 1 of NFL 2025, Kirk Cousins will be starting quarterback somewhere else with a new coach who wants a veteran quarterback present, and Michael Penix Jr. will be the starting quarterback for the Falcons.
So let's go back to story time here. Let's talk week 17. You got a all-pro former number 1 draft pick at quarterback who's been in the league a long time and had his team in the playoffs several years. And then week 17, they rest him for a rookie that came from a system at Texas Tech. Well, it's a great system and stuff like that. Let's see what Pat Mahomes could do week 17. We'll rest our guy, Alex Smith, even though Alex Smith got us to the playoffs all these different years. And we know what the rest is like in Kansas City. Could history repeat itself? Certainly can. I mean, fans are always going to clamor for the number 2 quarterback, the guy who's on the bench, the prize rookie and stuff. But what they've seen out of Kirk Cousins now, they want to see what they're going to get out of Michael Penix. So at some point, if it's possible, Michael Penix may be the full-time starter week 17 of this year, and then we'll see what happens from there.
AFC, we got a taste of what could happen. Sunday night game in Buffalo, 2 feet of snow, another dagger to San Fran. McCaffrey out for the year. Injuries just keep piling up. Buffalo will not be a nice host if they can somehow get one more hiccup from the Chiefs, who again dodged another bullet on Friday to the Raiders. Here, they just finding ways to win. They've had 9+ lives already this year. Thoughts on I assume, correct me if I'm right, you might have the Bills as the number 1 in your power rankings right now?
No, but they have ascended. Them and Philly are now very close to Detroit. Detroit had some separation for the previous 2 weeks. There's no separation now. The Bills and the Eagles are right there, not, nipping at Detroit, but Detroit's still narrowly in front of those 2. But this has been the kind of year it's been. There's always been 4, 5, or 6 teams at the top, 4, 5, or 6 teams at the bottom. There's some disparity right now. We practically know every single playoff team, for example. I'm pretty sure we know the 7 in the AFC. The only reason we don't know the NFC is because we have no clue right now who's coming out of the NFC West. And Atlanta and Tampa are neck and neck in the NFC South. But we know who's at the top, and these 3 teams are at the top.
The Ravens, bye week, and they could desperately use it. Here the Steelers sit on top, and the Ravens now got to deal with a Justin Tucker problem, which I know I didn't have on my bingo card. And I won't even bother you with what I'm dealing with Justin Tucker. But bye week, 12.5-point favorites, week 15 at the Giants. Then they host the Steelers, and then they go on Christmas Day to Houston. Pittsburgh's got a deathly schedule coming up here. Thoughts on who wins that division?
Yeah, so this race isn't over. I've got to tell you, as usual, Mike Tomlin is pushing all the right buttons. He's working with Pickens. He's working with the defensive guys. He's got TJ Watt completely healthy, which is unbelievably important. He's got Russell Wilson full of confidence and taking a bit fewer sacks, which is highly unusual when you think of Russell Wilson. He's still taking sacks, but it's not that 4, 5, 6, 7 or whatever. He's willing to trust George Pickens, as everybody should be trusting them. He's keeping his team relatively healthy. But you're right, this race isn't over because Baltimore is still the better power rated team. They have the better overall talent. The Justin Tucker thing, it has to sort itself out because we know that when Pittsburgh plays Baltimore, these games are incredibly close. And that game could be the deciding factor in the title. Because if Baltimore loses that game, they're probably going to slip to a 6 or even a 7 seed. I will tell you this, though. The last team Pittsburgh wants to play in the playoffs in the first round would be Baltimore. And the last team Baltimore wants to play in the first round would be Pittsburgh. Those games are brutal.
Looking at the schedule here, great Sunday night game. Chargers traveled to Kansas City. I'm looking at a number that opened at 5.5, now down to a 4 with a 43 there. Buffalo at the Rams opened at 3.5, now still 3.5. Where the Rams here, we talked about the Wild Wild West, and I personally put a fork in Geno Smith in Seattle 3 weeks ago, and they haven't lost since. Seattle is at Arizona. Arizona's a 3-point favorite there. Let's stay in the West. Can the Rams beat Buffalo, or is this too much of a wagon? And thoughts of Seattle at Arizona?
Yeah, so the way Josh Allen is playing, and I have him right now as the MVP in the league, I would make it Josh Allen 1, Saquon Barkley 2, and Jared Goff 3 if I had a vote right now. And obviously that changes week to week. And I think Buffalo is going to play Detroit, so it's going to be Josh Allen against Goff in the next week. But in this particular game, the way Josh Allen is playing, the way he's been not turning the ball over via fumbles or interceptions, that makes that Buffalo team lethal. But I will say this, I know I have, there's been differences in people I've talked to and then on shows I've done. I don't like the Buffalo defense as much as other people like them. I think the Rams can run at them. I think a healthy Stafford could do some things offensively with Karen Williams, with Puka Nacua, with Cooper Kupp, can move the chains. This is going to be about time of possession and about which team blinks in the turnover battle, because I think there is a path for the Rams. And should the Rams win, regardless of what happens in the Seattle-Arizona game, the Rams still play both of them, and they play both of them at home. So in some ways, this is a really, really critical game for the Rams. Not dismissing it for Buffalo either, because they've clinched their division, but they have that number 1 seed that they want to chase, and they have a victory over Kansas City. But this is going to be a very motivated game for the Rams. And as far as Seattle, Arizona, it's a quick turnaround because they played a couple weeks ago, 2-3 weeks ago. And both teams got defensive all of a sudden. And I think part of the Seattle getting defensive is because they finally had their new coach bye week and they got to resettle and reevaluate. And they've played a lot better defensively because of that. And part of the reason Arizona's going a little bit lower is because they're not finishing drives. Kyler Murray still does some schoolyard things and stuff like that. When they're playing their best, Arizona can score 30 on anyone. When they're kind of off on improvising and so on, they may not be as lethal as we think they could be. But this is a good game. I don't really have a good handle on either. I'm starting to get a handle on Seattle. I'm not quite sure where I am on Arizona. I think Arizona has a slight edge in a couple of metrics in the rematch. And if that's the case, then they're going to be tied at whatever their record would be, 7-6 each. And the Rams could join them. I mean, it could be a scramble in this division.
Are the 49ers officially dead, or they got one more swing in them?
Or the 49ers record-wise may not be dead, because they could tie a lot of these teams. The problem is their divisional record is horrible. And that's what puts them, I think they lose a lot of tiebreakers right now. They pretty much have to run the table, and San Francisco needs to hire a nurse, a physical therapist. They need to hire hamstring doctors. They need to do everything they can. Every year we're talking about San Francisco injuries, and I don't get it.
They just been banged up, and banged up. Let me see if I see one more for you here. We talked about Philadelphia. I'm kind of surprised at this one. I'll close the NFL with this one. The Jets traveled to Miami. Miami, a little too late in Lambeau on Thanksgiving Day there, and it wasn't, the frozen tundra. It was cold, but it wasn't the frozen tundra. Number opened at 6.5, Ron, down to 5.5. The Jets getting a little money. Season's over. Is Rodgers coming back? Yada, yada, yada. Brees Hall hasn't practiced all week, yet they're getting money. Is your numbers, you got Miami here winning by 7 or more, or is this a live dog here in the Jets?
I have the line basically 5.5, 6. So I don't see any particular value. Typically, this has been an underdog series. This is an awfully unusual year, is that pretty much, Miami's not thinking this, but right now both teams are clearly on the outside looking in a playoff picture. So they might as well just throw caution to the weeds. Tua's doing a pretty good job these last 4 weeks coming back after the concussion and stuff. He's throwing almost 75%. And even though the Jets' defensive stats look good, they're still allowing a few too many points, which partly is because of my quote-unquote friend Aaron Rodgers, who probably doesn't want to see me after what he did last week, because I don't know how the Jets lost. I do know how the Jets lost the game. I just can't believe it that they lost the game. It's typical that you would take the dog in this particular series, but I personally I really don't want any part of either team. If the Jets really came to play, Tua's been a little bit more sack prone. I think he doesn't want to take as many, rightfully so, he doesn't want to take a hit that could end his career, another concussion or whatever. So he's going down at certain times when the pressure gets a little too intense. But he's so deadly accurate. And you don't know about the mindset of the Jets as a whole. The organization's in chaos. It's kind of a game that's too volatile for my liking.
The scroll has been going the whole time. Everyone here on X knows where to follow you, of course, at Ron A Sports. But we always end this segment with a nice little 7.5-yard button hook for Ron's closing thoughts.
Yeah, so don't really have any NFL thoughts, although I always say in the NFL and college, especially this year, expect the unexpected. And I think other than this being a really good game on Thursday night, we have a lot of strange matchups because there's 6 teams that are on bye weeks this week. We got Jacksonville, Tennessee, Jacksonville without Trevor Lawrence. We got the New Orleans Saints and the New York Giants. The Giants haven't won a game at home. We've got some strange things, so you have to be careful. The thing that I'm trying to learn to do is not get mad with whatever the NCAA selection committee does. It's a beauty contest. They'll do what they do. My job is only to handicap the games and to figure things out and to see if I have edges that way. So I've kind of pivoted even past the championship games, and I've started some early bowl preparation. We've got 40-something bowls. We've got more than ever. We've got a lot of teams that are qualified. We've got 4 bowl matchups already announced. So I kind of like the undercard in terms of this week for the NCAA. I really like that Boise UNLV game. The rematch with the Jacksonville Western Kentucky intrigues me. The rematch Miami of Ohio and Ohio intrigues me. I don't know why I'm not as juiced up on the Power 4 matchups, but I'm just going to sit back. I think the lines are really tight. Nobody come out with the lock of the year. Everybody knows these teams and whatever. Please don't do that on social media or whatever. There are very few edges right now. The power ratings are locked in. Let me give you one story. because we talked about how everybody opens, everybody likes SMU. Jeff Benson, who you know well at Circa, I believe he opened Clemson as high as a 3-point favorite, if I'm correctly. I know he opened them as a favorite. I think it was as much as 3. And somebody asked him on social media, did you make a mistake? And he said, no, we had it this way. That's where the bettors went. And the last time people asked him that, he was right and the bettors were wrong. So even though everybody's on one side, it doesn't guarantee a victory. My power ratings, by the way, make the game SMU by 2. So I too would have been shocked to have had access to a Clemson +3. I probably would have done it too. I would have taken SMU +3. But it was an interesting opening line, and it's just a reminder that there are no locks this week in college football.
And I will close with Jeffrey Benson's story. I think it was 2 years ago. Ole Miss was rolling, and they were coming to Tuscaloosa, and he opened up Alabama -20.5, and everyone was screaming at him, "What are you doing? The real line's 14.5." And that was his line. And I think he went down to 15.5. Maybe it touched 16 to get closer to the market. Well,
Yeah.
Alabama won by 21. Okay. Yeah. So as I always have that little DM to Mr. Benson, I'm like, all right, your risk room's making a statement here, and he'll give me the wink, wink. He's probably spot on. Clemson will win by 3, Ron.
Yeah, I'm process oriented to begin with, and I like the fact that we do the shows more process driven than pick this, pick that, pick that. So I set lines on all these games before I look at the actual lines. And I also record when I'm right and when I'm wrong. And typically I'm like 49.5, 50%, 51% in terms of my line ended closer to the final score than what was set. But that's understandable. These guys do it for a living. Their jobs are on the line, setting lines for everybody to have at and stuff like that. My job is just to set the line. And then when my line is off from Jeff Benson's line, for example, take a look at it and say, what did I miss or what did he miss? And then work from there. It's a process point in terms of where the line is set and how I want to attack it. And I think that strategy is important.
1,000%. I do the same on Sundays where I'll do my lines and then I'll look at the opening lines and, usually within a half point, maybe a point here or there. But when I'm 2.5, 3.5 off, I scratch my head. And usually when I am that far off, they're right, I'm wrong. I tip the hat, but I'm like you. I want to know why am I so far off, Ron?
Absolutely. And sometimes I say, I got to grab this now. It's going to change. And sometimes I say, I understand it. So, you really got to do a line of reasoning for every game. You can't do the 15-minute handicap and say, I've got my card. Here we are.
Everyone knows to follow you on X or Twitter at Ron A Sports. Tell them where else sometimes they can find written work and your podcast schedule with Chris and everyone else.
Well, we did a podcast, Chris and Ted, that's available this week. Chris and I did a podcast on Tuesday. First and last time I'll try to mention it, but we talked about week 18. Chris also talked about betting strategies, which I think people loved. And I talked about week 18, and I wanted to talk about it now because we kind of knew who the playoff teams are going to be. But I don't want to talk about it before week 18 because I'm going to be quiet at that moment because there's a lot of moving parts that are important then. But if you want to go back to that, have an article up at Wager Talk that talks about some of the games this weekend in the NCAA, some bullet points that might be helpful in somebody's handicapping. And tomorrow, I haven't really announced it yet, but tomorrow I'm gonna host a show with a couple of people people are very familiar with on Twitter in terms of what kind of great content they put out. And it's going to be process driven again. We're going to talk about power ratings and how we got from the beginning of this season to where we are right now. Maybe talk about a couple of the games as well. But we're going to have a little show tutorial, process driven show about power ratings. So I'm around this week.
Oh, we can't wait. Everyone, if you're not following him, shame on you. Head on over to Twitter or X at Ron A Sports. Follow him. Have any questions, send them to him. He's one of the good guys like myself that if you ask a question, he will reply and answer the question. So
Absolutely.
tomorrow morning, 11 a.m., the NCAA Insiders are back. 4 in a box, Quentin Mills, Matt Grissom, and Nick Hathcote will be with us, and potentially Travis Geiger from Wager Wire will be back at the 11:35 hour, and then around 4 or 5 o'clock, myself and Riley Magnuson back for the closing bell. Want to thank everyone watching and listening. We can't do it without you. If you haven't subscribed, head on over to YouTube at East Coast Sports Investors. Subscribe. It's free. Turn on those notifications and never miss a show. Enjoy the games tonight, people. We will see you in the AM.